In the 1960s, millions of American children stared at the backs of comic books and saw something incredible. A smiling underwater family, a father, a mother, tiny children, all living happily in a magical underwater kingdom. The advertisement promised a miracle. For just a few dollars, you could own living creatures that would instantly come to life in your bedroom. They could perform tricks, they could play games, they could become your aquatic friends, and all you had to do was add water. For countless children, it seemed like magic. But when the package finally arrived, reality looked very different. Instead of tiny underwater people, there were barely visible specks floating inside a cloudy tank. The smiling family from the advertisement didn't exist. The castles didn't exist. The adventures didn't exist. Yet somehow, this bizarre little mail-order product became one of the most successful toy empires in American history. Over the next 4 decades, billions of sea monkeys would be sold. The man behind them would become a millionaire. And hidden beneath the colorful advertising was a story far darker than anyone could have imagined. Because the creator of Sea Monkeys wasn't simply a brilliant marketer. He lived a double life. A life that connected a beloved childhood toy to some of the most notorious extremist organizations in America. This is the shocking story of the Sea Monkey Factory, the empire built on childhood dreams, and the man who turned disappointment into a fortune. To understand sea monkeys, you first have to understand America in the 1960s. Comic books were everywhere. Kids bought them by the millions. Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, Archie. And almost every issue contained something just as memorable as the stories themselves. The advertisements. The backs of comic books were filled with impossible promises. Build giant muscles overnight, learn karate by mail, become a ventriloquist, own X-ray glasses, find hidden treasure. And among all those advertisements, one stood above the rest. Sea monkeys. The artwork showed a happy underwater civilization. The creatures looked almost human. They smiled, they waved, they appeared intelligent. The images suggested that children were purchasing tiny aquatic people. But those illustrations weren't photographs. They were fantasy, and they were deliberately designed to trigger a child's imagination. Millions of children mailed away their allowance money. Then they waited and waited. When the package finally arrived, excitement quickly turned into confusion. There were no smiling underwater families, no underwater civilization, no tiny people, only tiny shrimp. Yet, despite the disappointment, children kept buying them. Year after year, generation after generation. The question is simple. How did a product that rarely matched its advertising become one of the greatest mail-order successes in American history? The answer begins with a man named Harold von Braunhut. Harold von Braunhut was not a scientist first. He was a salesman, a marketer, a showman. Long before Sea Monkeys, he had already mastered the art of selling fantasy. He marketed X-ray specs, glasses that supposedly allowed people to see through clothing. In reality, they simply created optical illusions. He sold invisible goldfish, amazing hair-raising monsters, crazy crabs, and countless novelty products aimed at children. His genius wasn't invention, it was presentation. He understood something fundamental about childhood. Children don't buy reality, they buy possibility. And Harold knew how to package possibility better than almost anyone else in America. Then, in the late 1950s, he discovered something that seemed almost supernatural. Tiny creatures capable of coming back to life. And he instantly saw dollar signs. The actual sea monkey wasn't a monkey at all. It was a brine shrimp, a tiny crustacean related to creatures found in salt lakes around the world. Ordinarily, nobody would pay attention to them, but brine shrimp possess an extraordinary ability. When conditions become harsh, their eggs enter a dormant state. Months, years, sometimes longer. Then, when water returns, they hatch. Scientists call this process cryptobiosis. To a scientist, it's fascinating biology. To Harold von Braunhut, it was a marketing goldmine. He realized he could sell life itself, or at least the illusion of it. In 1960, he launched the product under a different name, Instant Life. The concept was brilliant. Open the packet, add water, watch creatures appear. The product initially struggled. Then Harold made a critical decision. He renamed it Sea Monkeys. Everything changed. Sales exploded. The secret weapon wasn't the shrimp, it was the artwork. Comic book artist Joe Orlando was hired to create the Sea Monkey family. The illustrations became legendary. A smiling father with a crown, a beautiful mother, happy children. The images looked alive, friendly, human. Children weren't purchasing shrimp. They were purchasing a fantasy, and fantasy sells. The genius of the campaign was that the product itself became almost irrelevant. What children remembered wasn't what arrived. It was what they imagined would arrive. The advertisements created expectations reality could never meet. Yet the disappointment rarely stopped future sales, because new children were always discovering the ads for the first time. Every generation repeated the cycle: hope, excitement, anticipation, disappointment. And then another generation followed. What made Sea Monkeys different from almost every other toy of the era was that the sale didn't end when the package arrived. In fact, that was only the beginning. Most toys gave children instant gratification. You opened the box, you played with it, you were done. Sea Monkeys operated on an entirely different psychological formula. The child first saw the advertisement. Then came anticipation, the long wait for delivery, the excitement of opening the envelope, the mystery of the packets, the instructions, the waiting for hatching, the daily checking of the tank, the hope that something bigger might happen tomorrow. It was an experience designed around suspense, and suspense is addictive. For many children, Sea Monkeys became a daily ritual. Every morning they checked the tank. Every afternoon they checked again. Every evening they searched for signs of growth. Children who had never shown interest in biology suddenly found themselves studying tiny moving creatures under flashlights and magnifying glasses. The genius wasn't the shrimp. The genius was creating a product that encouraged imagination to do most of the work. A child could stare into a tank for 20 minutes and invent entire stories. The Sea Monkeys became kings, explorers, pirates, families, heroes. The tank became a blank canvas. And because the creatures were so tiny, children could project almost anything onto them. Harold von Braunhut understood this better than anyone. He wasn't selling shrimp, he was selling participation. The child became part of the story. And that made Sea Monkeys far more memorable than countless toys that cost 10 times as much. Parents often viewed the product as harmless, educational even. It appeared scientific. It taught patience, responsibility, observation. Few parents realized they were witnessing one of the most successful advertising campaigns ever directed at children. Because every disappointment actually reinforced the mystery. Why weren't the creatures bigger? Maybe they would grow tomorrow. Why didn't they look like the advertisement? Maybe they were still babies. Why weren't they building castles? Maybe the castle accessory would help. Every unanswered question created another opportunity for a future sale. And that wasn't accidental. It was brilliant marketing. The famous Sea Monkey kits appeared deceptively simple. Packet number 1, 2, 3. To children, it felt scientific, like a secret laboratory experiment. In reality, the process was carefully engineered. The first packet conditioned the water. The second introduced the dormant eggs. The third contained food. The creatures didn't instantly appear. That was part of the trick. Children had to wait. The delay created suspense. And by the time the shrimp hatched, many children had already convinced themselves something magical was happening. Harold also marketed endless accessories: castles, racetracks, circuses, royal palaces, underwater kingdoms, entire ecosystems built around creatures barely visible to the naked eye. The factory wasn't really selling shrimp. It was selling imagination. And imagination had incredibly high profit margins. By the 1970s and 1980s, sea monkeys had become a cultural phenomenon. Millions upon millions were sold. The empire was thriving. But behind the scenes, Harold von Braunhut's life was taking a much darker turn. To the public, Harold was a quirky inventor, a toy entrepreneur, the man who created sea monkeys. But investigators would eventually uncover another side of his life, one far removed from comic books and childhood toys. Reports emerged linking him to extremist organizations, not casually, not accidentally, deeply. Harold was connected to white supremacist groups, including the Aryan Nations and the Ku Klux Klan. The revelations shocked many people, especially because Harold himself had been born Harold Nathan Braunhut and was raised in a Jewish family. The contradiction was staggering, yet evidence continued to emerge. Former extremists described his involvement. Investigations connected him to fundraising activities. Reports claimed he had helped acquire firearms for a Klan faction and regularly attended Aryan Nations gatherings. Suddenly, the man selling smiling underwater families appeared in a completely different light. The contrast was almost impossible to comprehend. Children of every race and background bought sea monkeys. Yet allegations connected their creator to organizations promoting racial hatred. The story had transformed from quirky toy history into something far darker. The major turning point came during the late 1980s. Newspapers began publishing investigations into Harold's political connections. Retailers noticed, distributors noticed, toy companies noticed. Questions spread throughout the industry. Were sea monkey profits helping fund extremist causes? Some business relationships ended. Some companies distanced themselves. Others continued working with him. But the mystery surrounding Harold had finally been exposed. For decades, he had operated largely in the shadows. Now his name was making headlines for reasons completely unrelated to toys. The public perception of sea monkeys began to change. The cheerful underwater kingdom suddenly had a darker backstory, one that many customers had never imagined. For most of sea monkey history, information moved slowly. A disappointed child might complain to friends, but there was no global audience, no reviews, no social media, no YouTube. Then the internet arrived, and everything changed. Children who had grown up with sea monkeys began sharing stories, photos, experiences, jokes. The gap between advertising and reality became impossible to ignore. Millions discovered they weren't alone. Everyone had experienced the same thing. Everyone remembered the same disappointment, the same expectation, the same tiny shrimp replacing the smiling family. For decades, mystery had protected the brand. The internet destroyed the mystery. Suddenly, everyone could see behind the curtain. The magic wasn't magic. The miracle wasn't a miracle. The underwater civilization never existed. And yet, strangely, the product survived. Because by then, sea monkeys had become more than a toy. They had become nostalgia. Harold von Braunhut died in 2003. But the story didn't end there. After his death, legal battles erupted over ownership of the sea monkey empire. Questions emerged about patents, licensing agreements, control of the brand. His widow, Yolanda Signorelli, became involved in lengthy disputes regarding the future of the business. Even after the creator was gone, the tiny shrimp continued generating money. The empire he built refused to die. Which is fitting. After all, sea monkeys themselves were famous for coming back to life. The sea monkey may be one of the strangest success stories in American history. A tiny brine shrimp became a global phenomenon. A mail-order gimmick became a multi-million-dollar empire. A simple science experiment became a childhood legend. But behind the smiling advertisements was a master marketer who understood something profound about human nature. People want to believe, children especially. They want wonder, they want magic, they want the impossible. Harold von Braunhut sold all of those things, and he sold them extraordinarily well. Yet his legacy remains deeply complicated. Because the profits generated from childhood imagination became forever entangled with allegations and documented associations involving extremist movements and racial hatred. Today, sea monkeys still exist. Children still hatch them. Collectors still buy them. And somewhere, another kid is probably staring into a tiny plastic tank, hoping to find the smiling underwater family promised by a comic book advertisement. They won't find it. No one ever did. What they'll find instead are tiny brine shrimp, a remarkable biological creature, a triumph of marketing, and a reminder that sometimes the most successful products in history aren't built on reality. They're built on a dream, and few dreams were sold more successfully than the sea monkey. If you enjoyed today's story, please subscribe and comment below. Thanks for watching. Until next time.